Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, 6th of February 2020, in continuation of the verse that I started in my previous session, 36 I think, of Surah An-Nisa, where I mentioned a list of priorities when it comes to dealing with others, Allah, parents, relatives, neighbors, and the traveler. Then Allah ends with ma malakat aymanukum. These are your slaves. And to the extension of that, maybe we can say the employers and employee relationship, when you engage somebody in your service, okay, this kind of relationships. Let me tell a story very quickly. Once a person reporting that the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Dhar, he was approaching and beside him was his slave, but you cannot recognize them. Only maybe because of the age difference you can say who is who. But the person said amazingly that I could not recognize them because they were wearing the same dress, the same quality of the dress. The maid or the servant and the master wearing the same thing. So he asked him that what's the story behind this? Why you are doing so? So then he went back to a history at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is apparently in Rabada, later on, maybe 30 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, or 20 years maybe around that time. So he said that at the time of the Prophet, one day I cursed my servant, and then the complaint went to the Prophet ﷺ. Curse means that he shouted with bad names to this, giving names to him and his mother and these things. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ reprimanded Abu Dhar strongly and said, Innaka mru'un fika jahiliya. You're a person still clinging to some of the values of the days of ignorance, means days before the Islam. One should not be like that. Islam came to change your behavior. So Abu Dhar took the lesson immediately. They don't need much advice. One word would be enough, and it would be enough to remind him throughout his life, you see. So that incident made Abu Hurairah change totally. And Prophet ﷺ said that in that same incident, that your servants, Allah has given them as in service to you, so you should thank Allah and help your servants. If you burden them with some excessive labor work, involve with them in accomplishing that work, participate with them, and let them eat from what you eat and wear from the same dress that you wear. So Abu Hurairah applied that things. You see how Islam comes to preserve the rights of those minority of weakest segments in the society, as opposed to the standard of the modern civilization led by the European mindset, especially that mindset that shaped the modernism under Nietzschean and Darwinian values, where God is dead and survivor for the fittest. So just we are in a jungle. If you can eat your neighbor, eat him and take his money. That's the essence. And how can these people achieve development and human development and SDGs and this and this? And that's why we are every day going back. Anyway, that's a long story. Let me continue. الَّذِينَ يَبْخَلُونَ وَيَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبُخْلِ. Allah ended this verse 36 with saying that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ مَنْ كَانَ مُخْتَالًا فَخُورًا. Allah never loves those who just show off, feel proud, and all they want is like oppressing others. So citing this list after citing this list of priorities and whom should we respect and deal with carefully and with dignity, Allah immediately went on to talk about, ended this verse with such kind of reminder that, remember, you might win some you might get away with ripping the weak from his rights and mistreating him. You might get away with it, but remember, Allah will not be happy with you. Allah will not love you, and if it happens, la qaddar Allah, if it happens, then that's the worst thing, that you fall from the eye of Allah, from the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah continues with the connecting word alladhina. So that means these are the same people who yabkhaluna wa ya'muruna an-nasa bil bukhl. They themselves are miser, and not only they confine the misery to themselves, but they tell others to be miser. وَيَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبُخْلِ. And they conceal what Allah has gave to them. And Allah has given the kafirin, those who cover the truth, adhab muhina, humiliating punishment. So you see, Allah has now went into pointing out the root cause, yabkhaluna, misery. It's misery. And Islam has made such mechanism that if you have 100 money sitting idle with you for 1 year, just give 2.5 out of it, percent out of it. And it was interesting, the other day Jeffrey Sachs came to our organization and gave some lecture on SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and he mentioned some very interesting fact. He said that we often say that the SDG gap, meaning in order for the countries to fulfill the sustainable goals, they need a financing gap of $2.5 trillion. $2.5 trillion. Although that amount needs to be analyzed further, but nevertheless, for the sake of argument, let's say that is 2.5 trillion. And he said that the global volume of the economy, supposedly this is the money reserved globally, is 100 trillion. So he said it without paying much attention, but you see how that corresponds amazingly with the amount of zakah. For 100 you have 2.5. So the economy of the world is 100 trillion, and the gap we need to fulfill all those sustainable goals is 2.5 trillion, if we agree with the 2.5 trillion gap. So subhanallah, the rich world doesn't want to pay that. If they paid, everybody would live. But this whole punishing the poor has become sometimes a trade we often boast of and show off in corridors, because if the poor, this is a hunger machine, if the poor was not there, how can those countries survive? Because they live on the poor, with nice photo shots of a smiling poor girl in a miserable condition. This is their currency. They use it. Some presidents, they use it to beg others, and these others, they use those smiling images of the poor kids to show to their voters that, you see, we are helping others. So this poor became a cheap propaganda machine for presidents and for both the donor countries and the doning the governments who accepts the donations. May Allah help us, really. I mean, it is sometimes said as a joke. It is said sometimes as a joke that the international development is nothing but the movement of the money of the poor, the money of the poor of rich countries, and giving it to the rich of the poor countries. So in between, both are sufferers. The poor of rich countries in terms of their taxes, and the poor of the rich countries and the poor of the poor countries, who are the most needed. In between these two, the rich of the rich countries and the rich of the poor countries are the one who are the real beneficiary of these things, with all this corruption machine and these things. Anyway, I almost reached to my working place. We'll have inshallah other opportunity to talk about these things. Wallahu a'lam, sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi